"This was the largest single-day attack since the campaign began," said one intelligence analyst. "More than 55 drone assaults have hit Russian refineries over 2 months, but this one was different. It exposed vulnerabilities far beyond the battlefield, crippling logistics, fuel supplies, and domestic stability. So why was this night the tipping point, and how does it redefine the front line of modern warfare? The answers lie in the smoke still rising from Russia's west." Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. At 3:53 a.m., Moscow's industrial belt lay under a blanket of mist. The refinery stacks loomed silent, their sodium lights flickering faintly over the rail lines that fed crude from Siberia towards the Volga. Freight trains idled on sidings, operators on the night shift logged pressure readings, unaware that within 60 seconds the hum of generators would turn into concussion. At 3:54, the first alerts triggered on perimeter sensors west of Perm. Seconds later, Bashkortostan's refinery network lit up like an industrial fault line, snapping open across the map. The operation had been set in motion almost 6 hours earlier. Hundreds of drones lifted from dispersed launch points across Ukraine's interior, flying in pre-programmed segments that stretched more than 1,500 kilometers into Russian airspace. Each had a single directive: bypass all detection networks and converge on the coordinates of Russia's most crucial fuel arteries. They moved in layers, some drawn low through valleys, others higher to confuse radar sweeps, and no single controller guided them. The swarm was synchronized through adaptive satellite navigation, each unit recalculating its route when jamming signals pulsed through the sky. To Russian radar officers, the incoming pattern registered as scattered interference. By the time visual confirmation reached command posts, the drones were already descending. That improbability was the strike's greatest strength. Russian air defenses were conceived to repel ballistic missiles or high-speed fighter threats, not hundreds of slow, autonomous aircraft flying barely above tree level. Traditional radar relies on altitude differentials and large reflective surfaces. These drones offered neither. Flying at just over 100 meters, they disappeared into ground clutter where radar beams turn noisy. Their decentralized coordination meant that even if dozens were intercepted, others would alter direction within seconds, slipping through new gaps. In essence, the swarm acted like liquid, flowing around any resistance. The first wave struck the refinery at Perm. Each drone carried nearly 200 kilograms of high explosive designed to tear through steel containment walls and ignite crude storage tanks. Simultaneously, a second formation swept toward Bashkortostan. Within minutes, blast waves rolled across both compounds. Control rooms lost electrical power, and reserve lines failed. Flames fed on pipelines, shooting upward until entire distillation towers glowed orange against the night. Fire crews mobilized but lacked containment foam in adequate quantity. With every attempted suppression, another explosion reignited the blaze. Russia's refinery system, sprawling yet rigid, became its weakness. Facilities like those in Perm and Bashkortostan were built decades ago, optimized for production volume rather than defense. They sit deep inland, connected by rail and pipeline networks that prioritize throughput. Their remoteness once guaranteed safety. Frontline fighting in Ukraine had seemed hundreds of kilometers away, yet that same distance limited the speed and effectiveness of emergency response. Local brigades faced diesel shortages and communication breakdowns as secondary fires cut fiber optic lines. Air defense batteries stationed nearby had been calibrated for larger signatures and failed to adapt before the second assault wave arrived. By dawn, satellite images showed columns of smoke spiraling from both regions, fuel reservoirs ruptured, loading stations gutted, and logistics spurs charred beyond operation. Analysts later estimated that between 8 and 10% of Russia's refining capacity had been crippled in a single night. It ranked as one of the largest single operational disruptions of the conflict, not because of the fire's scale, but because of where it struck, the industrial heart powering the military engine. As ground crews worked through the cascade of alarms and collapsing structures, command networks in Moscow scrambled for data. Initial assessments labeled the attacks as concentrated terrorism. Within hours, that framing shifted toward acknowledgement of a coordinated strategic strike. The realization settled slowly. This was not random, not symbolic, and not about revenge. Every target corresponded precisely to supply nodes feeding Russia's fuel logistics, the same refineries that sustain armored maneuvers and export revenue. The message embedded in the smoke was clear. Ukraine's war planners had chosen choke points over front lines. So the question emerges, why did fuel, not tanks, become the true target of precision warfare? Why refineries, not command centers or barracks? The reasoning began months before the first explosion. Ukrainian strategists studied how energy fuels Russia's military and its budget. Hitting battlefield targets won territory, but hitting refineries threatened the machinery that kept the war running. Diesel powers tanks, trucks, and supply convoys. It also drives the export economy that fills state coffers. One refinery offline means less fuel to move artillery, fewer profits to fund weapons, and rising pressure inside Russia's own borders. That made energy the seam in Russia's armor. The plan reflected a shift in how Ukraine viewed warfare itself. Less about advancing trench lines, more about economic exhaustion. Striking energy infrastructure meant turning Russia's strengths against it. The state built its dominance on oil exports and refining capacity. Paralyzing that sector collapses multiple systems at once, yet each attack carried danger. These refineries are technically civilian installations, supplying households as well as vehicles. Every successful hit risked international criticism and potential escalation. The strategy walked a narrow path between legitimate military necessity and economic warfare. Still, Kyiv calculated that collapsing the fuel supply would do more damage to Russian operations than destroying another battery of tanks. Within hours of the refinery fires, analysts estimated direct losses around $500 million, but the hidden cost grew larger by the day. Repairs demanded specialized parts from embargoed suppliers. Logistics slowed as train depots rerouted cargo to avoid contaminated lines. By the third week, accumulated damage had crossed $5.5 billion, a burden Russia could not easily replace. The refineries supported regional budgets through fuel taxes and employment. Their shutdowns drained both, leaving governors scrambling to stabilize prices as panic buying spread through provincial towns. The shortages reached Moscow. The Energy Ministry issued emergency rationing orders to major distributors, directing them to prioritize military transport. Civilian filling stations received half their normal allocations. Within days, fuel queues snaked through suburbs while regional administrators pleaded for more diesel to keep harvest equipment running. Price caps were announced, then quietly lifted when traders halted shipments. For the first time since the war began, domestic supply dipped below export commitments. Russia faced a choice: burn reserves to maintain public calm or sell abroad to sustain revenue. Either path deepened the wound. European economists watching the crisis warned that the energy shock would cut deeper than infrastructure damage alone. Oil exports underwrite Russia's financial resilience. Taxes from refined products feed state programs, pensions, and subsidies that preserve social order. When those incentives falter, pressure moves upward toward the Kremlin. At the same time, military logistics depend on a constant stream of refined fuel. Every truck convoy delayed by shortages leaves frontline units undersupplied. In practice, the refinery strikes removed both cash and momentum from the war machine. Distance had once seemed Russia's guarantee, hundreds of kilometers from fighting zones, beyond the reach of traditional artillery or missile fire. Overnight, that assumption vanished. Ukraine projected combat power across 1,500 kilometers into the industrial interior, proving that energy infrastructure was no safer than a supply depot on the front. The term front line itself began to lose meaning. When refineries burn in Tatarstan and pipelines buckle near the Urals, geography stops defining security. As power stations rationed fuel for generators, regional grids initiated rolling blackouts to conserve output. 42 administrative regions faced intermittent outages, streetlights dimmed, factories paused shifts, and municipal buses sat idle for lack of diesel. Each flicker of darkness reminded citizens that the war had arrived through supply lines, not soldiers. Modern warfare, it turned out, could bleed a nation without crossing its borders, through algorithms guiding drones, engines consuming scarce fuel, and energy flows threading a nation's survival together. Ukraine's drones didn't just destroy fuel tanks, they stripped away the belief that distance guaranteed safety. For years, Russia's war economy rested on that certainty. Refineries far from battle zones, pipelines shielded by geography. Now those boundaries no longer hold. As Moscow races to fortify facilities hundreds of kilometers from the front, the definition of vulnerability itself is changing. Strength is no longer measured in territory or armor, but in how quickly a nation can adapt when its core systems are exposed. If billions can vanish overnight through precision and code, what shape will the next generation of warfare take?